short introduction from your side?
Sure. Thank you, Vimal. Yeah, so, I came to the US, I said, in 93, came as a student, completed my master's in civil engineering. Bachelor's was from India, in civil engineering. Worked my way up and then did another master's degree in management of information systems that kind of makes me a little bit dangerous, so to speak, with tech, even though it was quite some time ago, but it was always ingrained in my head. Worked as a private sector consultant, then became a regulator for almost 10 years with the government here in Miami, and went back to become a public works director here with the city of Fort Lauderdale. Came back to then run a very large infrastructure program appointed by the mayor, which was about $8.5 billion, focused on water, wastewater, stormwater, which we call One Water in the industry, which is basically following the hydrologic cycle. And so fast forward after doing the $8.5 billion program, you kind of see it all from a construction standpoint, from a resiliency standpoint, public policy standpoint, human health standpoint, the connection of water to energy, connection of water to agriculture, water to health, whether it's marine life and whatnot, right? So the issue here is that water doesn't really have any boundaries, so to speak, but we manage it in boundaries because of political or other reasons, right? Bureaucratic reasons, because you have to, right? You just can't leave it in a very loosey-goosey manner. Anyway, fast forward about 2 years ago, I left the government and I came back to the roots in terms of the core problem issues from a systems level standpoint. What are the foundational issues? Because, when a crisis impacts, whether it was Flint, Michigan, or the wildfires of the West, or internationally, whether you look at India, right? You look at the problems with the Ganges for so many years. They're doing a great job now, but there's fundamentally something very, very common to all of these areas, and that's the governance. And so that is where my focus now is, with data becoming the unifying language to integrate these conversations. AI, I feel, is super important. It's there, like we discussed on our call earlier also, is it's going to be changing and transforming every day. But I think AI becomes a value-added tool to information that already exists. And our job is to make sure that there's integrity and governance around that information, which I call data.
All right, so thanks a lot, Hardeep. Hardeep, you've got a really fascinating profile around. One thing, see, it's not every day that a public somebody who has worked in public policy really want to go ahead with AI. So, what's something that has been pulling you towards AI, and why do you think, even though you have pointed it out that we want to have democratizing the data, we want to have a regulation
Mhm.
around it, but what is it really the pull factor for AI? Why not
Yeah.
some other technology? Why AI?
So AI has been around for quite some time, right? It's just that it has become more prevalent and become more commonplace, like every other piece of technology. If you recall, at least I recall, when Alexa came out and when all these IoT devices came out, there was quite a bit of resistance. When iPhone came out and Blackberries were still the place, or when Blackberries came out, when flip phones were there, and I still remember using beepers when I came to the US. There's a technology adoption curve that happens. And I think the winners are always those who are nimble and agile and adaptive to these processes, because once they are in the place, you can fight it, you can talk about it, you can have watercolor conversations that, oh my God, my job is going to be lost. The way I see it is that why it becomes important is, first, it is obviously making so many things possible, from the medical world to agriculture, right? For example, in the medical world, from robotic surgeries to and making it more available to those who it wasn't available before, to access to, let's say, agriculture, where you can actually see if a plant is diseased and what kind of remedial actions you need to take to a plant, right? So if you start looking at the ROI, not just to say how many hours was saved in terms of, let's say, doing an action. And we see this in the news all the time. How many people were laid off because of whatever reasons? Now, low code, no code tools. You can take one of the two choices, right? You can sit and complain about it, or you can become adaptive and say, let me go and learn and see where else I can use my knowledge to expand. Now, why does it attract me is because it's not about just the ROI of the time that it saves to do certain things. I look at so many different intangible savings, right? I look at it intangible, for example, if you save time to doing something for a business, and I look at it from a permit standpoint, right? A business needs a permit. If that permit can be expedited using AI or whatever technologies you want to use, then you have actually on the downstream of it, that business got ramped up faster, right? The people got jobs faster. There's livelihoods, right? And so on and so forth, right? So to me, it is about taking a look at those intangible values in terms of the ROI, just looking at saying, oh, you know what? Uh, it's just saving me so many different hours. Now, from a public policy standpoint, to answer your question, there's a lot of gaps here, Vimal. One is we still don't have standards on AI, right? When you start looking at human health and you start looking at any interpretation of regulatory standards, you need to start looking at ethical biases. You need to start looking at hallucinations. You need to look at many, many aspects of it so that you just don't take it for what it is. And therefore, up until we have some clear standards and governance mechanisms and rules and regulations to go by it, I think it's important to make sure that we have the human aspect in the loop. Now, in the process, it will definitely save you X percent. Let's call it X percent. Could be 10% all the way to 90%. But the human in the new loop is important, and that is where the knowledge, the deep domain knowledge of the person in front of it is important. You just can't put, let's say, somebody who's a clerk in a store to start working on the technology environment and say, oh, AI is doing it. You just sit in front of it and do it. No, you still need interpretation. You still need to be able to connect the dots. And so I think policies are very, very critical so that there's some method to the madness. Let's put it this way.
So Hadeep, you did mention about, and it's a known fact that in public policy you don't have much of the adoption of the technology. Leave aside AI. So how do you plan to bridge the gap? That's one. And is the gap that really exists, or is it just a public perception right now?
No, it is a gap that exists, and we have to. The sooner we recognize this gap, Vimal, the faster we will be more at ease. And I think it is going to be. It's super important for those in governments today, in the private sector, the younger generation that's graduating out of colleges or schools. I think the gap is huge, and part of it is also our educational systems, right? And I'm seeing some changes happening there. But if I go into, you can't get into the college environment, for instance. And I say this to most people that interact with me, whether it is in person one-on-one or someone will ask me for a piece of advice. My thing has always been that you have to be, if you're in the tech sector in any kind, you have to be a lifelong learner. Gone are the days where you say, I was a Python programmer, right? Or I'm just a front end or a back end developer. You have to be knowing many different systems. The second thing, the gap is that educational systems, whether you're doing civil engineering or mechanical engineering or environmental engineering or any form of engineering, I feel that there is a need for this interdisciplinary learning, right? You've got to have this cross-sectoral learning. And the learning has to be more with real applications in the industry. And AI makes it happen. All you have to do is learn a little bit of basics on prompt engineering and a little bit of what's happening in the industry. If I come across an article on electronic engineering, which I don't understand anything about, let's say, I think I can go to GPT today, doesn't matter which one you use, and I can say, hey, explain this to me like a fifth grader. And I would be told as a fifth grader what was the case in the past. I would have had to read a number of books, go to the library, talk to somebody, get their answers, whatever. Now I can get it in different ways and I can continue to interact with it sitting in my home, right? And being able to learn cross-sectoral knowledge. So I think the gap is not just AI gap. The reason you see the gap is in the industry today that people, some of them are not very keen on adoption, is because sadly it's ignorance, right? And ignorance is bliss, right? To say, oh, I know it all, or AI is not going to be succeeding. It's not, no. I think that's lack of your own knowledge. You only know what you know and you what you don't know. I think the whole issue then becomes um, plugging the gaps, and you can't expect the educational institutions to solve these problems because they themselves are learning. Think about it, like companies are still learning themselves. They're getting bombarded with these knowledge bases every day. So they're coming up with new curriculums. By the time these graduates come out, they go to the marketplace, they start working, then you collect data, then you analyze the data, what's working, not working. We that can sit and do whatever they want to do. So being nimble is important, but the gap is exactly what I said. People need to be open, and educational institutions need to start doing this cross-sectoral training.
I completely agree with what you're pointing out, Hardeep ji, about one second. Let me use the other one. Yeah, I'm completely agree with what you're pointing out about the gap being there. The gap is there. It's there. People, the understanding is not that clear. Uh, in terms of even I agree with you. It's not too much of tech. It's not you have to become a machine learning expert. You just need to
Right.
have a slight level of understanding how this entire system works. And once you understand that part, it's fairly simple. It's you can use the GPT to your own advantage. In
Yeah.
fact, when I started working around these area, I never thought of that I'm going to make AI agents per se. But as I spent more and more time, I became more and more confident around it. And once I understood the core basics of it, then you have the tools and mechanisms to work to learn around it. Now moving towards the part which is slightly wanted to bring it towards the automation bit of it. So Hardeep, you completely understand the automation is going to happen. uh, there would be changes in the job market, dynamics, size, style, the way the jobs have been operated, the way the skills are right now in the system, the way what kind of model it would be. Will it be a gig model, on roll, off roll, etc.? All those things will start happening. And as you have pointed out yourself, everyone is learning right now. Nobody can claim. Even Elon Musk will not be able to predict what is going to be in next 2 3 years. So in this scenario where you have automation which is becoming more and more inevitable, do you think we are ready especially in the public policy sector, something like core sectors around disaster management, around oceanography, around water, around maybe around something around air, as well as something related to carbon emissions. So are we prepared around these core sectors?
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I think the short answer would be not fully prepared, right? I don't think we are fully prepared for, and I'll qualify that with a few examples. If you look at automation from a standpoint of self-driving cars, right? We were never prepared. There were examples of crashes and so on and so forth. And if you're looking for 100% compliance, of course, we'll never be prepared. We still have airplane crashes, even though you have, autopilots and whatnot, right? So we have to kind of quantify that at what cost, right? Human health, human hygiene, all these things, safety are paramount. Now, where we are prepared for is to be able to start drawing inferences in n dimensions based on existing data sets. Where we are not prepared for is to just take the raw data sets that we have for the years and years before and start bringing inferences based on that raw data sets. Because in my own career, I have seen, for example, we used to have, let's say, SCADA data, which is basically remote telemetric data, right? On, let's say, the operation of a system, a pump station, for example. And if you are not looking at the data properly. You're not scrubbing the data properly. We used to see what we call it negative rain data, right? Now, how can rain data be negative, right? I mean, either you have rainfall or you didn't have rainfall. So there's no question about being in a negative rain data environment. So someone needs to scrub that data, and then that data needs to be fed into in hydraulic models or process models or decision models, right? Whatever they are. If you compound that one use case and you say, well, the anomaly in the data is garbage in, garbage out, which is what I always call, if your data is not good, your inferences and AI and all that hallucination, you cannot blame AI if your data is garbage, right? Then of course your output is garbage. So from that standpoint, I would say we are not ready. Are we ready to start experimenting and putting the systems levels framework in place? The answer is yes. If we are sitting and not piloting these frameworks and beginning to start training the workforce around us, because sadly, I will come over, the private sector will innovate way faster than the government sector, way faster. And so those in the public sector will have to either ship in or ship out. I'm sorry, because at this point, if money becomes what happens at the end of the day here? It's money. Everything is driven with money, right? Profitability. Governments don't have this issues about being profitable, but they don't have the luxury also of having an open checkbook because they are funded by
The tax.
citizens, the taxpayers. So if it takes the governments to take X amount of hours to do right things, and if the private sector can come in and start improvising it and doing it way faster than what others are doing, there's going to be some government somewhere, some progressive government somewhere who's going to bite the bullet and say, you know what? We are going to do it this way, and we are going to privatize this aspect of our operation to give it to somebody else because they can do it way better. Now, what happens? The people who are here, let's take customer service, for example. Perfect example, right? Automate customer service. Can we do that today? Absolutely. Absolutely. We're better than anyone else can do it with a call center. How? I just take a ton of the knowledge for the last 10 years or 5 years or 1 year, take all of these scenarios, synthetically generate a bunch of scenarios in n different variations in a feed a model, put a nice voice agent in front of it using Level Labs or voice. I think it's VAPI is one of the tools I like. And now you have an amazing system. Not only having an amazing system, you have all of the data in terms of customer dissatisfaction, how did the AI agent respond, and whatnot. Now, what happens to those people in the front end of customer service? How do I use them? Right? I mean, we got to do something with them. So either you have to lay them off or you have to repurpose them into some other tool, which I call unmet needs of that organization. Every organization, especially in the public sector, always has unmet needs. Our needs are way higher than the money that we generate, right? So we can't meet all our ends, right? Right? Which is why sometimes the public sector gets a bad rap to say, oh, you know what, these guys don't do these things well, which is not true. The fact is sometimes there's lack of funding, right, or lack of direction. So I think on that aspect of it, I think we can start taking the baby steps in the public sector rather than waiting for all of the rules and regulations to be written by some agency. I think it's important for respective agencies to write their own systems. There's enough knowledge out there to say, what are the 10 ingredients I need to have in my AI governance policy? And those will be my starting point, version 0.0. And then based on the lessons as you learn, you keep improvising it, you keep adding, right? But there's no harm there. In customer service, if I give wrong information, yeah, a human in the loop is always good, but at least it's not hurting somebody crazily compared to, let's say, a self-driving car, right? That would be my thought process, at least from a standpoint of adoption.
Interesting point you raised about self-driving car.
And today I was just having a conversation with my one of my colleagues. You know what's interesting part about the self-driving car? We are right now have achieved level 5, which is complete automation, right?
Hmm.
Still, even in the highly automated car, you will always see a steering wheel.
Right.
So that drives
Why?
the point that even though you don't require it altogether, it's become completely obsolete because it's now being controlled by a microprocessor there. So why
Hmm.
do you require to have that? But you so far we have not been able to get one that level of confidence that's there. And the other part is it's a maturity curve. It's a
Yeah.
maturity curve you want to have in case of exigency. And once this system adopts over a period of time, maybe next couple of years, there would be a lot of pressure coming in terms of when you have the car crashes going in one per million cases. Then obviously that would be removed altogether. It's unnecessary space for you, right? You're occupying a driver's space. Nobody's occupying that. Now, so Hardeep, here now moving towards bit on the automation side, you rightly pointed out. Public policy is going to be a trickier area. You don't want somebody who don't understand it because for-profit organizations see the resources as in a completely different manner when you compare it with from the public policy, which requires a different vision altogether. It's not about efficiency; it's more about impacting the lives and having a multifold impacts. Now moving towards if we let's say going forward, you're seeing a lot of wave of automation. A lot of an unfortunate part is, and which you have also pointed out in public policy, even the public sector per se, if I really generalize it, the level of adoption of technology is slightly lesser. Technology proficiency is slightly lesser because of the fact that it's driven on SOPs, it's a bit rigid system, uh, the overall system in most of the time. It's too much of generalization, but it really doesn't really help somebody to come and innovate it because there's always a resistance because there's always an SOP to go towards it. So in this kind of an ecosystem where you don't have the flexibility, the agility which is needed in most of the cases, like private sector, how do you think will the organizations in US, in West, and eventually in India and probably in Africa, how they're going to move about it? It's going to be a fairly large challenge.
It is, and and there we have to understand why, right? And I think the why is kind of a few reasons come to my mind. Most folks working in the public sector have moved around in the public sector in the same job or maybe multiple jobs, but they have been in the public sector, right? And sadly, and for good reasons or bad reasons, regulations are always playing catch up to a crisis, right? So, for example, when we had the collapse of the Surfside towers in Miami-Dade, or when we had the fires of the West, or we had Flint, Michigan, related to water, these were crises, or PFAS, which is a contaminant in water. We knew about PFAS several years ago, but the EPA just regulated it, right? We know about microplastics today. It has not yet been regulated, but we know about it. We don't need a regulation to tell us that plastics in your body are bad for you. We don't need a regulation to tell us that bottled water is bad for you. We know it. And microplastics come into your body, and we don't need regulations to say, oh, if you eat contaminated fish, now you're going to have a problem, right? Because there's a connection to all of these ecosystems. But regulations are always coming behind a crisis. Why? Because we just can't overregulate and overregulate and overregulate. That becomes another problem. So you need to regulate with some sense of common sense. And so while these regulations are happening and people are working in the government sectors, we are always playing catch up to implement what a regulation was improvised for. So our jobs in the governments are to make sure that we are the custodians or implementers of a regulatory aspect of it, depending on wherever you're working. It could be in properties, it could be in finance, it could be in water, environment, whatever be transportation, right? Aviation. We're always following certain norms and processes. We just don't come up with these systems on our own. And there's a whole process on how these regulations are built. So our focus always has been to educate around that knowledge base. It was never around focused on going, if I am a regulator, I have to go and learn AI. If I'm a regulator, I have to go and learn data. There was somebody else who was doing data. There was somebody else who was doing GIS. There's somebody else who was doing models, right? And so we ended up creating these pockets of excellence for good reasons. We need these pockets of excellence. Call them the domain expertise, call them the subject matter experts, and so on and so forth. That is how we worked in the past. That is how we are still working today to a great degree, not some degree, to a great degree of extent. Now, what needs to change is, which is I keep calling that interdisciplinary learning. What needs to change is these subject matter experts, right, on different domains, depending on the organization, they need to come together. They need to learn about these other sectors. Then you're able to see eye to eye to say, if I'm an operator and I'm a planner or a modeler, I'm not just sitting on my desktop doing models all day long. Am I really generating data from the modeling perspective that becomes fitting for an operator who's got to operationalize the work, whether it's running a plant or running a device, right? And so I think where I'm trying to converge is this knowledge needs to somehow coagulate, bring it all together. And in the past, it would be classrooms, it would be PowerPoint presentations, it could be whatever, right? Pretty boring, time consuming. Somebody has to build it, somebody has to force you to come to a classroom to learn. Then you get an educational certificate, and then you go and hand it on your wall and you say, I learned it. A one time action. I think that has changed and it needs to change. It needs to be continual. And I think if you ask me today, these subject matter experts can so easily be integrated with the GPT. So think about it, right? Let's say we put 10 people in the room. One is a operator, one is a planner, one is an engineer, one is a data scientist. If I'm able to extract the knowledge of these 10 people and I put a GPT around it, and a new employee comes to the organization, brand new after 1 year of education or 4 years of education or 5 years of experience, imagine the knowledge that this person has with 10 people, let's say 30 years of experience, all 10 people, right, in government, which is very common. Now you have 300 years of knowledge encapsulated in one place. How much time would that one person have to spend to go and learn from these 10 people? To 300 years, decades and decades of experience, right? We've got to start thinking in that terms, right? Because I think people are getting a little too hung up on policy or governance and rules and AI is here or not here, not here. I think it becomes incumbent on people like us to start showing the value of these kind of systems to those who don't understand it, not because it's their fault or they're against it or whatever, it's just because they've not been exposed to it. But I think the moment we do these simple use cases, which is where I think the timing is more than ripe to do this. There's no harm to do this. I take your knowledge, I digitize it. You take my knowledge, I digitize it. We put a system around it. That's value, right? So once we start doing that and we start showcasing those value statements, I think organically the adoptions will come, right? Because if I'm the 5 year graduate, right, or 1 year graduate from school, and someone gives me access to 300 years of knowledge, why would I rebel? Why would I would want it. I have access to Hardeep, I have access to Vimal. Hey, I know the knowledge now, right? So imagine how fast we are going there. So I think those are the areas which I think we should focus on. I'm not sure if I answered your question. I might have digressed, but that's where I think it
I
is.
got it around it. I got around it. I completely agree to that point. Now you have a different set of people who have been operating there, and you have different COEs, and it's about convergence. Now, Hardeep, you would also understand in public policy, especially, there's always a lag that's happening with the technology. And on top of it, again, it's because of the fact the way the technology is adopted, they would chase the highly profitable industries first, Then they will go towards government because government say it's not easier to get money around because they have to go and answer to the general population. It's not easier for anyone, even though it would be a highly beneficial use case, but they will require a lot of conviction around it. Now, with the technology which is going leaps and bounds, and it's good that there are some experts who have an understanding of both sides of the world that they are venturing into it. But there would be a lot of spaces. You might be able to operate only in one space, which is water space, but there would be hundreds of other spaces which where you don't have those kind of domain experts who are taking that much of level of, I'll say, proactiveness to understand what's happening around the new technology and try that use case and deploy it on a pilot basis and then scale it up. So how do you see this problem could be solved? Is government doing something about it, or is it a problem that is not even recognized yet?
Yeah. No, it is recognized. I think at the end of the day, it's a partnership that works, right? Because I don't think governments are in this alone to solve all the problems under planet Earth, right? Like I said, their job is to be the custodians of a system, whether it is for law or whether it's for health or whether it is for any other aspect, for police, fire, and so on and so forth, right? So they're always looking and governing those systems that are already established, right? We don't go around. If me as a government servant or a government employee comes out one day and says to you, let's say you're a client, and I say I want to do this because Hardeep wants to do this way, you're going to contest it. Where show me where it is in the regulations. At least you should. An informed citizen is going to say that, hey, listen, my read of the regulations say A, B, and C, and you're asking me to do E, F, and G. I think there's a problem, right? By the way, AI can do that way better now for any citizen to make them more informed when they approach governments, right? Just putting it out there that it's up to us to get informed citizens so that we can also bear the burden, not always blame governments to say governments are not doing the jobs, right? I need to know also as a citizen what I'm seeking. So I think, it's a partnership at the end of the day that works together. Citizens, consultants, governments, nonprofits, academia. And I think that partnership can become better, right? In the sense of, I think there's a great partnership between, let's say, the consulting world, the private sector, and governments, right? Because private sector is always either constructing or building or consulting or writing reports and whatnot. Where sometimes things fail is the operationalization of the reporting that is done by, let's say, the private sector to the government. Why does it fail? That's a complete another conversation. It could be all the way from inefficiencies to incompetence to lack of funding and everything in between, right? We don't know all the answers. And politics and bureaucracy also plays a game because if you think about it, right, when we talk about infrastructure has a lifespan of 25 years to, let's say, 100 years, depending on what it is. Our bureaucratic cycles, political cycles, are 4 years, maybe 8 years, depending on which cycles you look at. So every time the bureaucratic political cycles change, ideologies change, agendas change, systems change, and guess what? All of that goes downstream to the implementing governmental agency, which is why I say the partnership is critical for citizens to understand the bureaucrats who are implementing. They're not the ones who are necessarily failing. They're just adapting to changing circumstances because political agendas are also changing. That's a very important variable. So I think the partnership exists. I think everyone in that partnership, the bureaucrats, the political folks, right, the decision making people who actually pass budgets, they need to be having they should be connected to the table with that data. The academic institutions need to be connected there. I don't think that relationship is as good as I would like it to be because I think academia should be researching and developing on challenges that we are facing today in governments rather than doing some fictitious stuff that just because it it turns out a good paper for some international publication or some publication. Those are important, don't get me wrong. But I'm always looking at it to see for the benefit of the students who are going into these college ecosystems. Gone are the days where you're just churning papers out for publications now. I don't see a lot of value there. A genuine research is one that actually is operationalizable. A genuine research is something that actually adds value, but also has a life cycle behind it, right? There's some research, don't get me wrong, there's some research that you do because it's nobody knows about it. I'm not beating it down completely, but I feel that that partnership ecosystem between nonprofits, academia, governments, industry, politicians, decision makers, that needs to come closer together rather than us all working in our own kingdoms or silos, because then, we are always pointing fingers at one another, and that creates a lot of noise.
So, Hardeep, now let's move towards the area where you have an expertise around. Now, we everyone has been talking about, and it's a known fact that water, clean access to clean water is part of one of the SDGs. I'm not able to recall the number, but it is there. I'm sure about it. Now, with this coming in, you are seeing a lot of polluted rivers, and India is a case point. One of the two largest rivers are deeply polluted to an extent, and it's not that the governments are not doing. They have been
Mhm.
investing on multiple operations. The latest one is Namami Gange. We have got
Yeah.
some localized results, but we are still yet to figure it out. So, in this kind of ecosystem where access to clean water is going to be a challenge, how could a technology like an AI would be able to solve this and make it meaningful for people and contribute millions of lives?
Yeah, yeah. That's a great question, and there's so many variations to these answers, but I'll try and give you one use case, right? So let's take the Ganges, right? And there are so many other cases. I remember of a case in Chennai when I was there, which was a cancer cluster because all these tanneries were discharging to the ecosystem, and people were, all cancer victims, right? But you take something like the Ganges. Let's say we stopped all of the businesses polluting it. Hopefully, there's no outfalls that are going directly, and there's a flow coming upstream of the Ganges all the way down, let's say, to where the Haridwar is, right? I used to visit Haridwar quite often. So you have the Ganges is such a big ecosystem. It's a watershed. And water has no boundaries, but we govern it with different states and cities and all that stuff as it grows. And then you can keep pointing fingers and saying, you polluted the Ganges. So if you start looking at business outfalls into the Ganges, if anything, right? Discharges directly, runoff into the Ganges. Then you start looking at sensors. Like, let's say you have sensors into the watershed sporadically distributed throughout the watersheds. Today you have these buoys that you can plant in real time, the data that's connecting all the data. So the use case here is not just knowing where the pollution is coming from, right? In the sense of the hotspots, because now you have data sensors that are collecting data in real time. Now you have a hotspot that is emerging. So what do? The hotspot is now connected to the cloud. The cloud is connected to the GIS. The GIS is on my phone. I'm in the government. I'm looking at it from a standpoint of enforcement. My job is to make sure two things. One, why did the hotspot emerge, right? Where is that pollutant coming from? So I can trace it back to the next hotspot and somehow create some map around it to say, okay, this is the area, I've isolated it. So enforcement can be done on its much before that goes propagates down, right?
Steve, I think I have lost you in between. Sorry. I am not able to hear you, Hardeep.
it was a
It might have been because of the timings. Not sure.
okay.
Okay,
No
I've
worries.
resumed it. So you were
Yeah.
talking about the hotspot and enforce. You have to enforce it as a public servant, right?
Right. So what happens is if the data is getting connected with the sensors and the sensors are connecting the data to GIS and someone in governments who's entrusted to monitor the water body, whether it's a consultant or the government, doesn't matter, then what happens is why are pollutants important? It's not just because let's say people are getting exposed to it and you're bathing in the Ganges and now you got E. coli in problems and you're going to the hospital. That's important. But what's more important is the marine life, right, that thrives in these ecosystems. So anytime you have pollutants, right, that are not needed in these systems, what happens is you're creating an environment that depletes the oxygen in the environment. It becomes eutrophic. And when oxygen gets depleted, then it converts into, let's say, algae blooms, right? And when you have algae blooms, then you have fish kills. And when you have fish kills, you have completely destroyed the ecosystem of the marine ecosystem. So proactively remediating versus reactively remediating like how it is now is today it is like, oh, we're getting a algae bloom and fish died, so there's problems. So, you know, so then people, whether people will continue to pollute or not pollute is another conversation. That is education, that is enforcement, that is civic sense. So many different things come into play. Um, and so I feel that with the use of data and AI, these things will be super, super important because your actions will become far more not only actionable, but implementable and preventable because you're seeing what is happening in real time. Now, if you extend that conversation further with good data, you can actually start predicting to say, hey, what were the ambient conditions in that watershed at a given time in the past, and someone can model it and say, well, you know what, in this water section, let's say Harki Pauri, right, where so many people congregate recently with that Kumbh Mela, right? So if I start looking at that data there to say, hey, the conditions of this water shed where all these people are going to be congregating is mimicking certain conditions in the past that were not good, correct? So now I know that I can model and say that if I don't do something now, it is going to create a negative water ecosystem, right? So that's all predictability of the data based on using and deploying AI and then somehow making some inferences and some decisions based on that. I think the use cases are several, several
So
use cases.
this is especially useful, right?
Yeah.
Especially it's not that and it's Namami Gange or the Ganges pollution has become one of the major case points, and
Yes.
it's billions of dollars have been spent. It's not about the resource run. Different approaches have been adopted, but because
Yep.
of the scale, because of the population pressure, it's not been easier one. And you've been spot on in terms of pointing it out how AI could be used here. Now, so now just last bit of question to you, Hardeep. Now with the new generation which is going to come in, especially in public, I'll say public services, also along with that public policy, what would be the advices you would be giving with the changing ecosystem and the technology space evolving so fast?
To those who are graduating out of college or those who are for
Those who are
okay.
yet to join or maybe graduating, somebody who is just
Yeah,
going to join in.
I think it's a twofold, threefold set of guidance, I would say, right? One is I think it starts at home, right? I think parental level. I think it's important for us to start not necessarily saying it's AI, and AI, right? Because you have to humanize it. You need to make it fun. So you need to start looking at it from a standpoint of not learning programming and getting kids to just say, hey, focus on programming, because is doing programming for you today way better than and faster than probably what we could do in the past. So I think I would always focus on this aspect of cross learning. And I will tell the young engineers coming into colleges or schools, graduating out of schools, getting into college environment is, yes, you're going to focus on becoming a programmer or a mechanical engineer or whatever. And that's fine if you're going to build the next Boeing because you need deep domain knowledge. But if you're taking to be, you're not looking for being someone working at NASA necessarily, but you're looking to being versatile, you really need to pick up these skills of writing and communication and public speaking and tech and other aspects of it, because I think the challenge is going to be for you to be able to be a very good interpreter, a very good communicator. Even if you're looking at data, being a data scientist is half the problem or maybe a small problem. But if you can articulate the data from a business standpoint, financial standpoint, environmental standpoint, sustainability standpoint, if you can articulate that this is what this means, and if I'm a bureaucrat, I'm a policymaker, I'm, let's say, the president of a company or a CEO, and you come in and don't come in and start giving me all this data graphs and charts and Power BI tools and just talk all nerdy stuff. But if you can actually communicate to me, then now I have more value. You're providing more value to me. That doesn't just come overnight, Vimal. That comes very consciously, you putting these tools and systems in place. Some of them have it inherently, right, naturally, some don't. And so for those who don't, I think it becomes important that you recognize that you don't have certain skill sets and use the tools and people around you to augment your skill sets. If you're a parent and if you find your child is extremely gifted in, let's say, math and science and all that stuff, it's not enough to be just gifted in math and science anymore. But I think you need to start making sure that your child can actually be able to communicate, has a presence, is able to articulate tough scientific conversations into simple English. And that is where the focus should be, rather than saying, oh, I'm going to go to like these hackathons to learn whatever. Those are important. But I feel personally, this is my opinion, that you need more well-rounded skills, whether you're a programmer or whether you're not a programmer. And that is where the human in the loop will come in, that will always protect you, whether AI is there or not there. Those are the people who will have far more value than anybody else.
All right, Hardeep, I completely agree to it. And one of the reasons, let me stop the recording over here.
Sure.
And just if